Take two, because no, let's talk about it. This scripture actually broke up my first relationship with a woman. Here's why. Because when I first read this was the only instance that I knew about in scripture that spoke about women and women. Come to find out, it's not even speaking about women and women. It's speaking about women engaging in non-procreative sex. Heterosex, but not procreative sex. Use your imagination to think about what type of sexual acts actually do not lead to the having of babies. Here's the bigger picture though. Romans 1:18-32, scholars know that it is actually non-Pauline in the style and the tone and the words that are used. There are several words in that portion of scripture that are not used anywhere else. Listen why this is important, because either Paul is intentionally doing it because he's trying to argue or debate in a certain way and using a grammatical instrument to elicit a response, or these sections, this specific section was added in later, specifically Romans 1:18-32. Here's how we're going to talk about it here. We're going to assume that it is actually Paul's writing. Let's assign it to Paul, okay? What Paul is doing here is not speaking for God. Paul is not saying God is against lesbians and homosexuals, gay, bi, whatever. He's not saying any of that. He's saying what the Jewish Christians in judgment were saying about the Gentile Christians. They're accusing them of being idol worshipers. They're accusing them of having other gods before God, which would be a violation of the first two commandments. So he's acting like he's in agreement with them. He's saying, yeah, these people are doing this and they're doing that, and they're so, the wrath of God is going to come against them and they're in big trouble. And the Jewish people who were listening at the time to this letter being read to them would have been like, because they really do be messing up. Yeah. And then Paul switched up on them in Romans 2:1 and say, how dare you? How dare you judge people when you're doing the same thing? You're judging them on the first two commandments, but let's talk about the rest of the commandments. Are you stealing even though you teach people not to steal? Are you committing adultery even though you tell people do not commit adultery? Are you robbing temples and you're acting like you abhor idols? Lies, okay? So Paul is saying in Romans, all have fallen short. All have sinned. None of us can do any great work. Our works is not what qualifies us for righteousness, because this righteousness is by faith. If you keep reading Romans 2, Romans 3, he starts to talk about Abraham. So he says, if Abraham was righteous, it was not by the works of the law, because the law was not present. So then, can Abraham boast? Absolutely not. Which means, self-righteous people, you also have no boast in God, because all we all need is Christ, is the sacrifice of Jesus. So nobody, nowhere has any leg to stand on as being better than you, my queer beloved, as acting like, oh, well, we know the Bible and the Bible clearly says. That's exactly who he was calling out in Romans 1:18-32. That said, well, the Torah clearly says. Well, the Torah clearly says it. Why are you doing it? And why are you acting like you're better than other people? Jesus says that self-righteous people put burdens on us that they don't even carry for themselves. I had to do a part 2 on here because the first one that I did, I came a little light. I was trying to be a little bit more palatable, okay, for people to understand, but I wanted to come a little heavier for us, because I want you to really truly get this, that Romans 1:26-27 are not talking about queer people. It's specifically referencing the type of worship that was happening at the time at the Venus temples and all the other goddess worship that was happening, because they had sacred sex rituals that happened in their temples. Old Testament definition of sodomite was a temple male devotee, okay? And the word for, I'm going to put it on the screen here, and this, okay, was referring to a female devotee in these temples. And so that whole section, Paul is calling them out for judging them, the Gentile Christians, according to the first 2 commandments. But none of us can keep the law, because the purpose of the law was to cause you to realize that you needed Christ. The purpose of the law is not to make you feel like you can keep all of it, because nobody can keep all of it. Because if you could have, like scripture says, if the law was perfect to bring you into relationship with God, there would have been no purpose for Christ to come. So I want you to know clearly, beloved, this scripture is not speaking to you, okay? Women who love women, this scripture is not speaking to you. As a matter of fact, none of the scriptures that the Clobber passages are speaking to women, because at the time, women weren't considered to be full autonomous beings that were able to make decisions, to even have a sexuality. So the natural use of a woman back in that day was to have babies. So if she's exchanging that, what her body is for unnatural relations, again, use your imagination, okay? So I have a full episode of this right now on the Queer Christian podcast. Go and look it up. It came out today, okay? Wherever today is for you, it came out today. Go and listen to it. I go more in depth in understanding where this is from. And if you have more questions, please, beloved, drop it in the comments. Love y'all. Bye.